You are currently the only person in
So
this
like
conference.
I said, if any of you folks have last minute questions, got about 5 minutes or so, please ask. Last time. And maybe this will give you a sense of how the quiz went. So at the start of class, we were talking more about the 4 big goals in psychology. I said that we try to describe what people are thinking, feeling, and doing. We try to explain or understand why they are like that. We make predictions, and we try to control or change people. From there, then, we spent some time talking about how you actually become a psychologist, the steps involved, working towards your bachelor's degree, master's, and maybe a doctoral degree as well. And we talked about where psychologists might be employed. But really, the bulk of our conversation last time was spent talking about the specialty areas or fields within psychology and different theories. So in terms of the specialty areas, I said that the biggest one, most psychologists are either clinical or counseling psychologists. They're the ones you usually think of in terms of being psychologists. They do therapy work. People come into their office, the therapist, the clinical psychologist listens to them, maybe makes a diagnosis, tries to assist them. We said that some psychologists are developmental, so that I am. That means we study how people change as they grow older. We said that some are cognitive. They study thinking and thoughts, decision-making, problem-solving. We said that social psychologists study the interactions between people, things like attraction, love, communication, obedience, conformity, helpfulness, discrimination. There are the experimental or biological psychologists who do more research on the brain and the inner workings of the body, hormone levels, neurotransmitters, and so on. And then there's industrial organizational psychologists. They're the ones who study the workplace. They study businesses, hiring, firing, ensuring that employees are productive and successful. And then towards the end of class, we talked about the big theories or perspectives that are still with us. I said the oldest one that is still around is Freud's psychoanalytic or psychodynamic theory, which looks a lot at issues from our childhood, as well as unconscious factors that may be influencing us. The learning or behavioral school places more emphasis on observable behaviors. And they believe that what we've seen in the world around us and reinforcement and punishment can really influence us as well. Cognitive psychologists are interested in studying our thought process. You've got the humanists who believe that we have free will. We can achieve anything if we believe in ourselves. Again, the biological or psychobiological psychologists who want to study us from the inside out. How are changes in our brain and our system influencing us? You've got the socio-cultural ones who are most interested in the societies and cultures that we are a part of and how that plays a role in determining who we are. And then I said the best critical thinkers out there take more of an eclectic point of view. They try to understand people by using multiple perspectives and theories. So all that said, are there questions about any of that? And or how do you feel about the test now that you heard all that stuff? Feeling good. Okay, that's good. Okay, Jenny's not happy. Others are saying they're okay now. Questions about any of that material? Okay, that was easy. So last time, last week, I was making the case for the fact that I think in a sense we're all psychologists. We're all trying to understand people and why they are who they are. And I said the biggest difference between me and you folks has to do with the scientific aspect of that. So with that in mind, I want to show you something. You don't have to write this down. And it only looks like I'm trying to hypnotize you. I promise I am not. But this is called the cycle of science. And this holds true whether we are talking about psychology or most other scientific fields. And yes, I will adjust the camera here. Okay, so the cycle of science. Psychology especially, but any scientific field begins with curiosity. Now, you folks get curious about stuff, so do psychologists, and your curiosity comes from a few different sources. Sometimes it comes from yourself. So I mentioned last week that I had done some research into memory for people's names. Why did I get curious about that? Well, it's because I'm not good at remembering people's names. You've got your own issues and interests as well. And so sometimes we get curious based on our own experiences. Maybe you struggle to fall asleep and you want to know more about that. Or maybe you're interested in ways of helping you cope with the stress you've been experiencing. Maybe you've been diagnosed with depression and you're interested in that. Sometimes we get interested based on the people that we are close to. So maybe things that your best friend, your dad, your significant other have gone through. Any of those things might wind up inspiring your own curiosity. And sometimes you just hear about stuff. So maybe just knowing that so many people are dealing with anxiety and depression issues these days since the start of the pandemic. Maybe you're just curious about different ways to help people overcome depression, even if it's nothing that's personally affected you or someone close to you. Or maybe you hear about some research on TV and you're wondering more about that. So for many people, this is the start and the end. I get curious about things. Maybe you're curious whether men or women have better memory ability, and that's it. You just wonder to yourself. Okay? Now, for science to advance, we've got to go further than that. And for you folks, you might go further than that also. So the second step is to generate a hypothesis. And I'm going to define this more formally next time. But for now, I'll just say it's a theory. It's a belief that you have. So maybe you believe that women have better memory ability than men, or that men have better memory ability than women, or that they're about equal. Maybe you believe that listening to some music a half hour before bedtime can help you fall asleep faster. Okay? You do that, so do psychologists. We come up with these theories, these guesses, these predictions. And just like you folks, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. For many of you folks, this is where you stop, right? You might say, I think women have better memory ability than men, and then you leave it at that, okay? But again, for science to advance, we can't just leave it at that. We've got to take the next step. And the next step is what we're going to focus on today and next time. But I've got to change your word. I know it says design of an experiment, but I would just say design a study. We could design studies. And you folks might do that. Like with that memory one with men and women, you might come up with a basic way of studying it. You could say, okay, what I would do is I would show 20 words up on a screen to a bunch of men and women. They're going to be up there for 15 seconds. And then after they go away, everyone's going to have paper in front of them and they can write down as many as they can remember. That's a real quick and easy way to measure memory. But there are tons of other options, right? You could ask a bunch of men and women to write down the names of as many US presidents as they could recall. Might be challenging. You could wind up reading a story to a group of people, and then a week later asking them questions about that story. So there's tons of ways that we can measure memory or stress or mood or whatever it is we're interested in studying. For most of you, though, even if you've gone this far, okay, you're curious about something, you have a theory, a hypothesis, you've designed a little study. For most of you, that's the end of it. You don't actually carry out that study. But obviously, for psychologists and other researchers, we would. And that would be the next step, is actually running that study. So we would bring in a group of men and a group of women and show them stuff on the screen and have them write it down immediately afterwards. We go ahead and perform that research. I know it says an experiment. It's not always an experiment. There are other types of research that we're going to talk about today and next time. And then after we've run the study, then we've got to analyze the results. What happened? How did the men do? How did the women do? Let's compare and contrast the data. Similar, or was it pretty different? And then once we've looked at the results, we've got to let other people know what we found. I'm going to zoom out because these two kind of go hand in hand. We want to get it published. We want to let other people know what we did and what we found, because if you keep it to yourself, well, the world and science doesn't benefit. You've got to let other people know what happened in your research. Don't keep it to yourself. It's not a secret. And then once you do that, other people may get curious, and sometimes you get curious. Maybe you expected this outcome and you got a different set of results. That's weird. So when other people or you become curious, you may do a similar study or one that's a little different. Maybe the next time out, you'll measure memory in a different way. Or maybe you'll do it exactly the same way, but with different people. And who knows, on a different occasion with different people, you might get the same results or you might get very different results. We don't know. That's why we run studies, okay? And notice here, since it's called the cycle of science, that this is never ending. That's why it looks like we're trying to hypnotize you. It goes on forever. We never reach the point where we say, you know what, I did my study with men and women comparing their memory ability. Here's what I found. And now we know forevermore that women have better memory than men, and that's the end of the story. It's never like that in psychology. It is like that in fields like chemistry. I mean, you put together two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, they're really confident what's going to happen when you do that. They know. They've done it a ton of times. It's probably not going to change hundreds of years from now. But psychology doesn't quite work like that. We're all pretty different. And even for us, even if you went back and tested the exact same people, the results might be different on a different day, right? Maybe today you were feeling a little tired, couldn't pay attention, but if we tested you tomorrow, you might have had a great score. You never know. That's why we keep going. Okay, so questions at all about this basic process in science? Okay, so today and next time, we're going to focus mainly on this third step. How do we design research? Okay? And in a very general sense, there are two basic types of research. We're going to focus on one of them today. It's called descriptive research. And as the name implies, we describe things. Descriptive studies measure things as is without controlling anything. We're just measuring, we're not controlling. Just measuring without controlling. And I'll explain more about that difference in just a second. Okay, you may want to make this little chart in your notes, maybe, because I'll refer to it today a little bit, but a lot more next time. There's two basic types of research. One is descriptive research. The other we're going to call an experiment. And with descriptive, we measure things as is. Okay, so let me explain the difference here in terms of what I mean. I'll let you get caught up with the writing. I see a lot of you writing. Okay, so we measure things as is. So what I could do with all of you folks is I could ask you to tell me how many hours of sleep you got last night, and I could measure your current mood on a 1 to 10 scale. I could ask you, what's your current mood? 10 meaning awesome, 1 meaning horrible mood. That would be descriptive research. I'm not controlling anything. I'm just measuring how much sleep you got last night, and I'd be measuring your mood. Now, the other type of research, an experiment, I would need to control something. Let me explain how that would work. What I could do is have all of you volunteer to be in my study and divide you up randomly. And maybe for this group of people, I'm only going to let you get 2 hours of sleep while you're in my study. For this group of people, I'm only going to let you get 5 hours of sleep in my study. And for people in this group, I'm going to let you get 8 hours of sleep while you're in my study. In other words, I would control how much sleep you are getting. And then the next day, I could measure your mood. So do you see the difference between them? Okay, experiments we control, descriptive research we just measure as is. Okay, so we're going to be talking today about descriptive research, and there are 3 or 4 main types of descriptive research that we do in psychology. Probably the one that we do the least, at least that's my guess, is a case study. And I know you've heard of this term from other classes, but in here, it might mean something a little different than what your other classes mean by it. Maybe. So in a case study, we do an intense, in-depth investigation of one person, or actually in some cases, it's not just one person. It might be like 2 or 3 or 4 people. But either way, it's a very small number. And the goal is to either gather a whole lot of information or to learn a lot about this unique individual. I'm going to give you some examples of both. Okay, I'm going to start with the gather lots of info example. And this one's probably more rare. But back when I was much younger and I was working on completing my degree, I had a good friend of mine who was also working to become a psychologist. She is one these days. And she had an interest in obesity. Now, what she chose to do was a case study. She worked with 3 women who were each morbidly obese. Each one weighed more than 500 pounds. And she spent a lot of time with each of these women. She asked them about their weight history, about their weight loss efforts, about their social life, about their family history of obesity. She asked them about their dating life, about their self-esteem. She gave them a number of psychological tests. And she was able to gain a lot of information about each one of these 3 women. So the goal with the case study was not to understand obesity overall for most people. Instead, she wanted to understand these 3 individuals. And that's typically the focus of a case study. You want to understand this person or this very small number of people who are in your case study. So she wanted to gather lots of information. More often, though, when we do case studies, it's because the individual is unique or they have been through something that's pretty unusual. Now, the thing is, we are all unique in our own special, quirky, interesting ways, but some people are more unique than others. So I wanted to ask you folks a question, and there is no wrong answer here. Who can you think of that might make for a really interesting case study? Maybe it's someone that you personally know, or maybe it's someone who's famous, infamous, you just want to understand more about them and what has made them who they are. Yeah.
My fiance's best friend, they went to the NFL draft last year, and he was hit by a train and survived, but he lost his leg below the knee, and he lost all of this part of his hand. And there have been no signs of depression. He makes jokes. He changed all of his career goals, and now he's more excited about that than what he was going into. And I've just never seen someone with that kind of trauma take it so breathlessly.
That might make for a really interesting case study when you've got someone who's had a really severe injury, and whether they coped well or not, whether they have had major health issues and mental health issues or not, Either way, they might make for a really interesting case study, and it sounds like you would make for a great one.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Who else comes to mind? Again, any answer you give here will be correct. Gives you a lot of freedom. Who can you think of? Maybe someone famous or infamous that maybe more of us are familiar with? You'd want to know more about what made them tick? Yeah, Eliana.
Just like any serial killer, I feel like we don't get to study them enough a lot of the time.
Well, and fortunately, there's not a whole lot of them. So they are pretty unique. In my earlier, yeah, that's a good thing. In my earlier class, someone even mentioned Jacob Crumbly, the kid down in Oxford, Michigan, who brought the gun to school, and you know what happened next. And so they might want to do a case study with him to find out about his relationship with his parents, how they disciplined him, the attention they gave him, about I don't even know if he has siblings or other relatives, how he's gotten along with peers, how he did in school, when he first started becoming violent, and. The more information you get, the more you can understand Jacob. It doesn't necessarily help us understand school shooters overall, but we can learn a lot about him, and that might be interesting. Yeah, anyone else? Maybe do one more example.
Survivors of sex trafficking.
Yeah, we might be very interested in people who have been through the sex trade industry, and what that was like for them and how it affected them and what their childhoods were like and so on. The more information we gain, the better. Yeah, and by the way, I know we've been focused more on some negative or difficult things. We could also study greatness. So like an exceptional athlete, a great musician. Someone in my earlier class mentioned Tiger Woods. You could study Michael Jackson. You could study a president. And pretty much anyone could make for a really interesting case study. But again, the thing is that helps us understand that person really well. It might not help us understand the big picture on that issue.
So for case studies, going in depth of one person, how does that work when they are dead?
Yeah, so obviously you can't interview the person who's deceased, but you can read up on them. You can talk to people who have known them well. But I agree with you. Usually case studies are probably better if the person is alive and they allow us to study them. Even if they don't talk, we can still observe them and talk to people who know them. And Cole online was mentioning not only the shooter might be interesting, we might also be interested in doing a case study with some of the survivors there, some of the ones who were shot or others who witnessed what took place. So yeah, you could do a case study with anyone. So the good news is that we gain a lot of information, especially from unique individuals. The downside is that it's just one person. What holds true for them may or may not hold true for others. So we usually want to have more people involved in our studies. So here's a second option. We could do something that is known as a naturalistic observation. And with a naturalistic observation, what we do is we study people in natural environments. What I mean by that is that we're not bringing them into the lab. That's very different. We're going to study them in natural environments. I might change that word because we don't necessarily know that it's their natural environment. Maybe they've never been to this place before and we're observing them. But the goal is to observe them somewhere where they might normally be rather than in a lab. So first of all, I got to mention, this is only going to be helpful if we're interested in studying behaviors, not so much with thoughts or feelings. Because I can observe you, but I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know how you're feeling. But I can measure behaviors. Are you writing? Are you raising your hand? Are you running? Those kinds of things. Second, you want to be sure that you pick your environment well. So for example, if you wanted to find out something about how aggressive children are, where could you do a naturalistic observation? Okay, go to a playground or a park. Where else? Daycares and schools. Any other ideas? You could go into their home or into other children's homes. Yeah. Any other ideas? Good list so far. That's true. Could go out to a park or somewhere where kids are sledding, or you could measure. Well, you could take a look like on a snow hill or something. On the football field, perhaps. You could go to what's that? Hockey, absolutely. Could go to an amusement park or Chuck E. Cheese. Kids get aggressive there too. So anywhere where there's kids, potentially you could go. Now, most of those are public places. It's easy enough to just set up shop and start observing. The one that Kaylee mentioned, in the home, obviously we do need to get parental consent. We can't just break into their home and start studying their children, and yeah, there's ethics there. Okay, so there are some challenges to this type of research. Let me say the obvious part first of all, or maybe you can fill in the blanks. So let's say that we go to a playground and want to study kids' level of aggression. Why is it in the school? Why is it important that we get close enough to the kids that we're studying? Why is that important?
Are they pretending?
Okay, I don't know what they're like beforehand. All I know is what they're like today when I'm observing them. So why do you want to get good and close to them?
Maybe you hear them and see their facial
Absolutely.
and things like that.
Yeah, so if I'm really far away, I can't tell what they said or who said what to whom or who hit who first. So you want to be good and close. However, are there any problems with being good and close? What's the problem? They might, especially the parents might be freaked out, yes. But in terms of the data collection, what's the other big issue? You get too close to them, what? Not so much a bias issue, but they might change their behaviors. Likewise, if I wanted to find out about students' test-taking strategies, okay, I mean, if I hung out way back in the front of the room, that's not going to give me great info. I can't tell what you're doing. But if I'm good and close to you, yeah, you may behave a lot differently. Okay, so it's really tricky. You want to be really close, but not too close. So I don't know what the right amount is. And yes, you can use video cameras, but there are some ethical concerns about doing that, about setting up video cameras in public areas. So it's very tricky business. I mentioned a couple other things. Number one, we don't know if this is their natural environment. Okay, maybe we observe them at a playground that they go to every day, or maybe they've never been to this playground before. Another big issue is that we have no control. What I mean is, let's say I go there today and I see how aggressive these kids are, but there's way more boys than there are girls. Well, that could affect things. I didn't control who's there and how many kids. Maybe the kids there today are a bit on the older side. I didn't control that. Maybe the equipment is stuff that boys tend to be more aggressive with than girls. I didn't control that. So in general, the big issue with naturalistic observations is we have no control. We're just observing things as they are, doing the best we can, but we don't know why these things are happening. And I'm going to come back to that. We don't know why. It's one of the other issues with descriptive research. I'm trying to think if I'm missing something here. Oh, I already mentioned, again, it's only useful in certain situations. So if I want to study aggression, this works pretty well. If I want to study eating behaviors, it works pretty well. You can go to like a food court or a restaurant. With your permission, I could go into your home. But again, you might behave differently, knowing that the researcher is there. So it's tricky. But with other things, if I wanted to measure your memory, for example, it's not a great way to do the research. If I wanted to find out about your TV viewing habits, well, yeah, I could sit on the couch with you for a week, but that's probably not the best use of my time. Likewise, if I wanted to find out something about your sexual behaviors, you can guess what the problem would be there. Naturalistic observation is probably not the best way to go. So if I did want to study, yeah, you're figuring it out pretty easily. If I did want to study your sexual behaviors, or if I did want to study your TV viewing habits, what's a better way to go about studying those things rather than observing you? give a survey. I could ask you questions, right? I could have you tell me about your behaviors. And we're going to talk a lot about this today. Surveys, questionnaires, and interviews. And you probably already know what it means with, and if you want to write it, you can, but basically you just ask people what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're feeling. And there's a lot of good news here. This research is pretty quick and easy to do. It's much quicker than spending a ton of time with an individual or sitting around at a park and observing people carefully. Much easier to just ask. But there are a number of challenges, problems, issues, use whatever word you want, with doing survey or questionnaire research. What are some of the problems with this type of research? What do you think, Eliana?
People could just lie.
What? No. No one in the history of psychological research has ever lied. Yes, honesty is a huge issue. What else? By the way, that's the one that almost everyone mentions first. Not surprising. But I would argue there's a couple others that might be just as important, if not more so. What are you thinking? Was it Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe people just get bored and just fill it out and don't really pay attention to what the questions are.
Okay. And you're right, that's different from honesty. I hadn't really planned on it, but they just kind of rush through it.
Yeah.
Kind of put that off to the side a little bit. They rush through, they just kind of go A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C. Okay, done. So yeah, that's an issue too. What else?
Not having a representative sample of the population.
Representative sampling. I will explain what that means a little bit later. For those who don't know. What else?
Not really having an understanding of what's asking or comprehension.
Okay, I like how you put that. The wording and how people interpret it. Yeah. I'd say there's one other really big issue. I'll get to it along the way. Or anyone else have a thought? Imagine you give out your survey to 1,000 people. Get back the results. What do you think might happen? Yeah, you're not going to get 1,000 people. Not everyone is going to return their survey. How that response rate?
I know I don't.
You're not the only one. And we'll talk about memory issues too. So I would say these are kind of the 5 biggest issues with surveys. They're not the only ones, but they're 5 of the bigger ones. We're going to dive deeper into each one of these 5 here, starting with the honesty one, because it's such a critical issue. Okay. There's my question. Why do people lie on our surveys? We want good, honest, actual, factual information, and sometimes people put down intentionally wrong information. Why would they do that to us?
To give you socially desirable answers. Like,
Okay.
sometimes it's embarrassing to answer certain questions. You don't want to.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, I ask how many sexual partners you've had. Do you think there are some people who might be embarrassed to say 0 and give a higher number?
Yeah.
Do you think there are some people who have a higher number and might be embarrassed and they put a lower number?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one could go in either direction. When people are embarrassed by their behavior or how others might judge them, yeah, they might lie to us. What else? There's 2 other big reasons. Got to keep looking at this call. I see the. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What else?
Some people just like to lie.
Yes, they do. Is that the second one or is that my third one? That's the third one. I'll get to that in a second. But yes, some people do like lying just to mess up the data. I would say there's one other big one. And let me give an example here, and I'll talk more about these in a moment. Did any of you folks have to take a survey in high school asking about your alcohol and drug usage? A lot of high schoolers do. Did some of your classmates, or maybe even you, lie on it?
Everybody lied.
Why did everybody lie?
They're scared they're gonna get in trouble.
Exactly. Exactly. So if I tell the truth, am I going to get in trouble? Is the school going to find out? My parents? Law officials? I'll just deny everything. Have I ever used alcohol? Absolutely not. Have I ever used marijuana? I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of it, never seen it, don't know what it is. No, everything. That was easy. Okay. So yeah, if I can get in trouble by telling the truth, I might be very tempted to lie on a survey. And then the third big reason, as Jenny was mentioning, is that some people just like lying. They like messing with the results. Let me give you an example. I've got an old cartoon here. Really old. It's like 25 years. You folks still know Calvin and Hobbes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Classics. Okay, so Calvin's little boy, Hobbes is his stuffed animal tiger who comes to life for him, but no one else. Calvin says he's filling out a survey for Chewing Magazine, as if that existed. And he claims to be 43 years old and to spend $500 per week on gum, and that his favorite flavor is garlic/curry. And Hobbes mentioned that the magazine should have some amusing ads soon, and Calvin says he loves messing with the data. Do people love messing with the data? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we'll come back to them. What do? We want honest results. And yet we know some people are going to lie to us. Now, one thing we can do is just ask nicely. Please be honest. Please, please. I need honest results. And that might help. But beyond just begging and pleading and asking nicely, what else can we do to try to get more honest information?
Resend them out. Resend out the surveys to a different group of people.
That might help with response rate or representative sample. Not necessarily with honesty, though. What are you thinking, Eliana?
Reassure people that they're going to be anonymous.
Okay. First big idea, to make it anonymous. And I'll talk about that question mark in a second.
Maybe offer something. Like a survey, if you can get.
I think that might get more people to respond, but not necessarily honestly. Yeah. I'm gonna revisit that notion, but make it anonymous. So generally speaking, when it is anonymous, now you don't have to fear getting in trouble. I may know that someone in the room has claimed to be a heroin user, but now I don't know who. So generally speaking, anonymity, making it anonymous, is a good idea. I'm in favor of it. Usually leads to more honesty. However, by making it anonymous, it does make it easier for some people to lie. So for example, if I knew that it was you, Devin, filling out the survey, you told me, and maybe it was an interview. Oh, by the way, we don't do interviews very often these days. They take a lot of time and work and effort. We tend to send surveys out in the mail, via email, via text, sometimes phone calls, in a magazine, you name it. But generally, we get more honesty when it's anonymous, but it does make it easier for people to lie. So for those people who like just messing with the results, they might say that, well, yeah, I use heroin about 12 times a day. On a slow day, I masturbate 20 times, just to mess with the results. Whereas if we were doing an interview or I knew exactly who it was, if you put answers like that, I might say, really, you're not. And you might not want to give those kinds of just obviously false answers when someone knows who you are. So generally, I like this idea. It's good, but it can lead to more lying.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully when we get the results, 3 truths, but we don't know. So here's our second idea. And these last 2 are lame ideas, but sometimes the best we can do. Cross our fingers, hope it all evens out. So for everyone who's lied and told us, they've had more sexual partners than the truth, maybe there's an equal number who have told us a lower number. Maybe it'll all balance out, hopefully. Third idea, kind of lame. It's a little dangerous, but we sometimes do it. We can throw out what seems to be bad data. The question is, what counts as bad? So I want to give a couple of examples here. One that you've seen, one that you haven't. So let's say, for example, I wanted to find out how much money Delta students earned last year. And so I give a survey to a few thousand Delta students. I get back the results, and there's a Delta student who claims to have earned $6.3 million last year. What do you think? Is that bogus data, or do you think they were being honest? They're probably lying, right? Probably. But are you 100% sure?
No.
Yeah, maybe they've got a great side business. Maybe they had a great night at Soaring Eagle. Maybe they hit the lottery. Maybe they had a big inheritance. I don't know. So if I got that result, or maybe they've had really good investments. If I got that result, I would guess that they were probably lying, but I don't know if I would throw it out. Now, if someone claimed to earn $6.3 billion last year, that I would throw out. I'm really confident no one here earned that much. But $6.3 million, even though I doubt that anyone here earned that much, but if you did, feel free to talk to me during the break. We can maybe, this isn't being, oh, I am being recorded. I didn't say that. My voice was thrown there. So 6.3, I would doubt it, but it's possible. I would probably keep it in, even though I might get burned a little bit by that. But let's go back to Calvin and Hobbes for just a moment, because they're cute. So let's say you get this data. Okay, you got the sheet of paper. Person filling it out claims to be 43. You wouldn't know. Definitely want to keep that. But what about the other two? So let's say you've got someone who claims to spend $500 a week on candy and gum. Would you keep that data or toss it? Toss it? You're pretty confident no one spends that much? Guess what? I know someone who does.
Oh, God.
It's actually my brother, believe it or not. And a typical week, he spends a few $100s on candy and gum. Now, here's the fun part, because I like games and I like quizzes. Why does my brother spend that much on candy and gum each week? Anyone care to guess? Please guess. What do you think?
Does he have children?
He does. He has 3 kids, but they don't eat a ton of candy and gum. What do you think?
Is he a teacher?
He is not a teacher.
Is he a
Far
smoker?
removed from that.
Is he a smoker?
What do you think, Cam?
Oh,
Not a teacher. What do you think, Eliana?
It's like nicer candy.
It's
He's
that'd be really, really nice. But no, that's not it either. You got a guess there?
does he work for like the candy company and he has to go into the stores and like
You're close.
that?
You're really close. Yeah, I'll explain it. So my brother, his main job, he's an apartment manager. But on the side, he owns a number of vending machines on the east side of Cleveland. He's got to stock them. So each week he spends hundreds of dollars to stock the vending machines. So if he said he spent $500 a week on candy and gum, he would be honest. That would be honest data I just threw out. But I would argue that you're on the right track, Cole. But I would argue maybe it's a little misleading to say that he spends that much. So we'll talk about wording shortly, but maybe what's a better question to ask rather than how much do you spend on candy and gum each week? What's a better question?
How much do you spend each week for you and your family's own consumption?
Yeah, for your family's personal usage. Because if that was the question, his answer would be pretty close to 0. He's not big on candy and gum, his kids aren't, his wife isn't, and so on. Okay, then there's this one. So let's say you get that survey back and someone says their favorite flavor is garlic or curry. Would you keep that data or toss it?
I keep it. People are weird. People are weird.
Yes, people are weird.
Where would you find gum?
I would look
Okay,
up
so
those
let's-
flavors
so
first.
let's break this down. So first of all, do they make it? So I went looking yesterday and I couldn't find it. I was putting in like unusual gum flavors and so on. While they don't make this, when I've looked in the past, I did see this online. It was sold like in Asia and you had to buy like a 50 pack and it was really expensive and I'm cheap. So I didn't buy it, but I couldn't find it yesterday. But I did find all kinds of other interesting flavors. Meatball, pickle. There were different flavors of pop. There was wasabi, there was ginger, all kinds of interesting stuff. But at least at one point, I know they did actually make this. And my guess is if they made it, there must have been someone who enjoyed it. So could there be someone who loves that flavor? I would guess yes. So if it were, yeah, I would think the smell would not be great. But, you know, if you're throwing that data away, you got to be a little cautious because yes, maybe it's someone messing with you, probably is, but you could be throwing away good, honest data. So just I would say be a little bit cautious. We generally don't like to throw out data unless we know that it's blatantly can't be true. Otherwise, we typically keep it in, even if we think they might be lying to us. So it's tricky. Okay, questions, comments? Okay, so we'll take our 5-minute break here. Go get yourself some candy and gum. And then we'll talk about some of the other issues with survey data. I don't know about pickle. I love pickles. I don't know if I'd want pickle gum. Yeah.
You ever had the pickle ice cream?
I have not. I have tried like the dill pickle flavored popcorn. And I love popcorn and I love pickles together. Not good. No. Let's see, who's Nick? That must be you. Okay, welcome. Nice to have you here. Yeah, I bet. And you were okay with watching from home, right?
Yeah.
Sound and visuals, everything looked okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Sorry I missed Tuesday. I'll still kind of recovering.
Yeah, no worries. If you want, you can still go online and pull that one up to watch later.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna do
Okay, good. Good. Everyone have a good weekend. All right.
I worked all weekend.
Working. Yeah. You're not alone.
Okay.
Anyone watch any of the football playoff games over the weekend? There were some crazy games in there. It's a little bit later than usual, so it's going to be February 13th this year.
That's such a bad day.
Why is that a bad day?
Valentine's Day is the next day.
It's the day right before, yeah. At least it's not coinciding.
That's what I'd much rather not on Valentine's Day.
Yeah. But that's definitely later than usual. I don't think, and I'm no expert, I don't think it's because of the pandemic. I think it's because they added an extra week to the schedule. So these days, excuse me, teams play 17 games. So I think that pushed it back, and they've added more teams to the playoff with wild card games, so that pushed it back. But
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
So,
Dr.
No
Day,
worries,
I
yeah.
emailed you a video that I found about the perspectives. I thought it was a nice overview.
Oh.
It's like 15 minutes
Okay.
if you could share with the class. I tried to figure out how to email the whole class, but you
I'll
can't
check
do
it
it
out
on this
tomorrow.
one. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so a couple of questions for you. I know I did this last time, but this is another time. Don't ask a follow-up question. Normally, I like follow-ups. Don't do it here. Have any of you ever experienced emesis? Got one person. Have any of you ever experienced somnambulism? One person. Okay. Let me ask. Emesis and somnambulism. No. Okay. Let me ask a different question. How many of you have ever had a time where you threw up? Got that right. Any of you ever done any sleepwalking? You people. I don't even know what that means. Kind of sleepwalk? Okay. So when I asked the first time about those experiences, why didn't you say yes? Did you know that emesis is another word for throwing up? Did you know that somnambulism, somnum means sleep, ambulatory means to walk? You learned 2 new words today, boys and girls. Impress your parents. Tell them you remember when you were young one time you had an experience with emesis. See what they say. Okay, would we actually ask about emesis and somnambulism on a survey? No, because we know people don't know what those words mean. But there may be times where we use terminology that people are unfamiliar with. So if I ask you, are you conservative? Do you think there are people who don't really know what that means? You know, when I was college age, I barely knew what that meant. So we want to be sure to use terms that people can understand. Plus, it even gets a little bit tricky. Well, I'll put this one. If we say, are you conservative or liberal? Because what if you're somewhere in between? Or what if you're very conservative financially, but very liberal when it comes to equal rights issues? Or if I said to you, are you a baseball fan or a football fan? What if you don't like either of them? What if the answer is both? I like both of them. So you got to watch out. Don't force people to make a choice that they don't want to make. Along the same lines, if I were to say to you folks, here, we'll just do a show of hands. How many of you would say that you are a good parent? Got 2 people in the room who are good parents, and most of you are not good parents. That's too bad. In between. You see the problem there? Most people in the room are probably not parents. So that's probably not a great yes or no question. A better yes or no question is, do you have kids? Then maybe the follow-up could be, but even there, good or bad, you know, what does that mean? There may be days where I say, you know what, I'm really not doing a good job as a parent. Other days where I would say, I'm doing a great job. So watch out with those either or statements. Okay, another issue with surveys and their wording is that sometimes they are unclear. If you're wondering what ice cream has to do with sex, the answer is nothing. There's a comma there, 2 separate issues. We'll talk about both of them. Well, yeah, I'm not judging. I'm not judging. I'll just leave it. It's too early in the semester. We get to about week 12. I may have more. Okay. So, what's the favorite ice cream? This may be an old reference. I don't know. Any of you ever watch a show called The Newlywed Game, like on Game Show Network? Okay, some of you. Here's the basic premise. It's an old show. They brought it back a few times. They get newlyweds, couples that have been married less than a year, and they'll have one member of the couple on stage, the other one goes off stage. And then they ask the person who's there a question, and they have to predict what their partner will say. They might say, okay, what's your partner's favorite type of animal? I would have to guess. Then my partner comes. If she says the same thing that I guessed for her, we get points. You get the most points, you get fabulous prizes. That's how game shows work. Okay. So a few years ago, I had a student in one of my classes who was doing some research, and they designed something that was kind of like that, kind of like the Newlywed Game. And so I thought, this would be kind of fun. So I brought it back home and tried it with my wife. And one of the items, sure enough, it said, what's your favorite ice cream? But there were problems on both ends with this. For starters, I didn't eat a whole lot of ice cream. So I was really struggling to figure out what I should write for me. But there was also an issue on her end. That you'll find out about the issue in a moment, but I was confident at first that I was right. Because while I didn't know which flavor was my wife's favorite, I knew that she loved Breyers, because around that time, there was always like 2, 3, 4 different kinds of Breyers in the freezer. So when asked to predict what she would say for her favorite ice cream, I was really confident I put down Breyers. Her answer was mint chocolate chip. You see the problem? Yeah. It probably should have said either what's your favorite flavor or what's your favorite brand. Now you could say, well, dude, of course they're talking about flavors. Don't be an idiot. But the thing is, I didn't know which flavor, because she had a lot of flavors that she loved. So I didn't know that, but I did know her favorite brand. So that's what I went with. The question could have been clearer. That's the point here. This one. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you the question, but I will tell you the answer to a question. This was really famous. This happened before most of you were born, but you may still know about this because it was so famous. Going back a long time ago, there was a guy who was asked a question, and his answer was famous because it was being televised. He looked straight into the camera and he said these words: "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." And he was pointing the whole time. A little weird. Okay, so you know who we're talking about here?
Yes.
Okay, it was then President Bill Clinton. Oh, you know that guy? Okay, president during the 90s. And he was asked if he was having sexual relations, if he had had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. So his answer was a famous one. Now you can say what you will about his honesty, and just for the time being, I'm going to push that to the side. I want to argue, though, that the question was not very clear. So the question he was asked was this: did you have sexual relations with Miss Lewinsky? But here's the thing, what counts as sexual relations? If by sexual relations we're talking about intercourse only, well, according to both him and her, that never took place. So did intercourse happen? No, but they both did admit that oral sex took place. So what I want to argue here for the time being is that the question could have been clearer. They could have said, did you and Monica Lewinsky have intercourse? That's one question. Separate question, did you receive oral sex from Monica Lewinsky? The two different issues, they might have had two very different answers, maybe. Again, with the honesty, we don't know for sure. But again, for now, I want to argue that the question was not very clear. Likewise, and I'm going to revisit this one later in the semester, if you ask people, have you ever cheated on your partner? Well, honesty is a big issue there. But what counts as cheating? Do you think we might not all agree on what that means?
Yes.
I think so. So that's the problem. To get good, accurate data, you want to be really clear about your terminology. Just like when we were talking last week, like how many blondes are in the room. Same sort of thing. You got to be clear. Okay, next one. I accidentally wrote the same thing twice, but I want to give some different examples here. Of some really interesting research took place a few years back, where they asked a bunch of people to watch videotape footage of a car crash. And in this video footage, the cars are traveling at 30 miles an hour. 30. A week later, they brought people back into the lab and they were asked a series of questions about what they had seen. But for some people, they were asked this question: in that car crash, how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other? Some people were asked how fast the cars were going when they bumped into each other, when they met each other, when they hit each other, when they crashed into each other. Did the wording matter? The wording did matter. That's why I'm talking about it. It did matter. Where do you think people gave the highest estimates? Met, contact, bump into, crashed, or contacted? Crashed. The people who were asked about the cars crashing into each other estimated 40 miles an hour, The lowest one, when people were asked about the cars meeting each other, the estimate there was about 31 miles an hour. That's a big difference from just changing one word.
Yeah.
So you got to be really sensitive when you're wording a question. But I want to talk about this even more interesting question on the same survey. For some people, they were asked this question. In the car crash, did you see the broken headlight? The other half of the people were asked this question. In the car crash, did you see a broken headlight? Now, it sounds like I said the same thing, but what was the difference between my two sentences? And the. Who cares? They're both tiny little words. Why does it even matter? What do you think, Jenny?
Because one is stating that it was there, and the other one is stating like, did you notice it at all?
Exactly.
Did it happen?
Yeah, so if I say to you, did you see the broken headlight? It sounds like I'm saying there was one. I just want to know if you saw it. If you ask people, did you see a broken headlight? Sounds like it could go either way, right? So you've got to really be careful. Changing that one little word, the versus gave them very different results. Be cautious with the wording. It's tough. Should it count if? Well, these next couple are kind of fun. Okay, so let's say I want to find out something about your eating habits, more specifically about your pizza consumption. And so I want to know how many times you've eaten pizza in the past week. And you're thinking about Sunday, a couple of days ago. And Sunday, maybe you were at home, maybe you were watching some of the football playoff games. You had a piece of pizza, and then you did some other stuff. And then about 15 minutes later, you had a second slice of pizza. Here's my question. Does that count as eating pizza once or twice? Had a slice of pizza, did some stuff for 15 minutes, then you had a second slice. How many of you would, you got to pick once or twice. How many of you would say, I would count that as eating pizza once? How many would say twice? More, okay, more majority with once. By the way, my other class, majority said twice. What if it was 30 minutes apart? Would you count that as twice? 45 minutes? No. An hour? No. So what's the criteria?
I would say 24 hours.
Really? Anytime in 24 hours that counts as once? So if I had pizza for breakfast, then lunch, then dinner, that's one time eating pizza?
Or I
I
guess,
would kind of
if you ordered it-
Really?
Yeah, in a meal period, like for specific.
Because how many times, I mean, with kids, like, I'll take a bite of something, go switch to laundry and come back in 10 minutes would have passed.
Okay, but you would count that as eating it twice.
I would count that as eating once if it's
It counts as
like,
once.
sitting there.
Okay.
Ran downstairs to do something and come back.
Okay, here's the point though, and I'm not going to disagree with any, but do you think some people might count it as once, some might call it twice?
Right. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
Okay, what about this? And I'm going to go kind of like your example, Sarah. So let's say that you're thinking again about Sunday, and you had pizza for dinner. I'm sorry, you had maybe a burger for dinner, but your kids had pizza. It looked really good, and you said, "Hey, can mom have just a bite?" They say, "Okay." Would you count that as eating pizza for dinner if you just had one bite? No. No one?
No.
I wouldn't count it as.
What if you had two bites? Does it count then as eating pizza for dinner?
No, you have to have a slice.
Have to have a whole slice?
Yeah.
What if you eat most of the slice, but you leave off the crust at the end? Does that count? That's not a whole. That's not a whole slice. Exactly. Okay, you see the challenge I'm getting at here? What about this? What if you had a calzone that's kind of a folded pizza? Does that count as eating pizza? No. What about a pizza bagel? Does that count as eating pizza? This is very debatable. That's the point. That's the point. What if you have, let's see, what else could we do? What if you have like a pizza hot pocket? Does that count as eating pizza? That barely counts as food. What about those nasty little Totino's pizza rolls? Would you count that as eating pizza? They're nasty. Oh, you're making it even worse. Nasty. Ranch is horrible. Okay. Here's the point. Do you think we might disagree potentially? That's the point. That's the point. So if you were asking someone about their ice cream consumption, but they went to Culver's last night and they got some of the frozen custard, should you include that as eating ice cream? It's not ice cream. What about gelato? What about frozen yogurt? Some people would say, I'm going to count that, and others would say, I'm not going to argue one way or another. but people might disagree on what counts and what doesn't. Similar issue with this. So let's say I'm trying to find out about your television viewing habits, and I want to know how much TV you watched yesterday. And you're thinking of last night when you had on the NFL playoff game. It was the Rams, led by former Lion Matthew Stafford, and the Cardinals. And you had the game on the entire time. It was like 3.5 hours, more or less. But you were trying to be a good student. You were reading your book, but you did glance up, and the game was on the whole time. Would you count that as 3 hours worth of TV viewing? Would you say that you watched no TV? How much TV would you give yourself credit for having watched? You've been reading the whole time. You are looking up on occasion. You counted as 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour?
I'll give it half.
No. Again, we might not all agree on what counts and what doesn't. That's part of the challenge. Yeah, and by the way, this all feels very lawyerly, doesn't it? Like, hey, does this count?
Yeah.
That's kind of the point. So does this. I like this one. 24 pieces isn't 24 pieces. Well, gee, it sounds like it. Shift the camera here. And I'm going to tell you about a couple of pizza places I have gone to. Starting with one of the ones I've been to the most times in my life, probably. I'll tell you more about it in a moment. But when I go there, I typically have about 24 pieces of pizza. You worried about me?
Is it thin crust?
I'll tell you about it in a moment. But 24 sounds pretty problematic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you about it. It's a place in the Dayton area. My wife's from Dayton, Ohio. So is my mother-in-law. I doubt anyone's been there. It's a place called Marion's. Anyone been there?
I think I got pizza from there. It's kind of close to Lima.
Yeah, actually it is. Okay, so to answer the question, their pizza is like that, and it is very thin crust.
Okay.
And here's how they cut it. And so you get a large, it's got about 75 pieces. Yes, I've counted. Just for the purpose of this. And yes, when I go there, I have about 24 pieces of pizza. Are you a little bit less concerned now than you were a minute ago?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Okay, now I can't say that I love Marion's, but my wife, my mother-in-law did, my sister-in-law, so we've been there a lot. But one of my favorite pizza places, and I'm going to guess that some of you have been there, it's a place called Giordano's. Anyone been there? Heard of it?
Yeah.
You been there? Okay, where have you been there?
I think it was Chicago.
It is Chicago. I lived in Chicago for a while, and if you know something about Chicago and Giordano's pizza, what can you tell people about it?
That is known as like the best pizza joint in the Windy City.
It's great. What's
And
the pizza
it's
like?
deep dish.
It is really deep dish, like literally about that thick.
Yeah.
No kidding. And so when my wife and I go there, we will get it small, and they cut it into 6. That doesn't look right. They cut it into 6. I can't draw. My handwriting stinks. My drawing is worse. They cut it into 6 pieces, and I would say I usually have about 2 pieces. If I have more than that, I usually start regretting it. Hit about 3 pieces, you'll probably need like a defibrillator or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I'm there, I get 2 pieces. So here's the point. 24 pieces of Marion's is not the same as 24 Giordano's. Not at all, not by a long shot. So if I told you, hey, I just had 2 pieces of pizza from a small pizza last night, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound like very much for, a grown adult. Then again, if I told you I had 24 pieces from a large pizza, that doesn't seem appropriate. That's way too much. So let's say that I wanted to ask one question, only one question, to try to get a sense of how much pizza you consumed last night. Because apparently asking how many pieces is not the best way to go. What should you ask?
How many slices?
How many slices? Well, I would still say 24 or 2. Any advice?
What percentage of a pizza did
A
you
percent of the pizza? Well, if it's personal pizza, I'd say 100%.
True.
If I had a big pizza, I might say, well, I just had 15%. So percent isn't a good way.
I feel like you could compare it, like everybody knows what a hot rice sliced pizza is. Like.
True.
So
Yeah.
how much pizza had you in comparison to a slice of bread?
Yeah, you could call that an
You
average
could. You
size
could.
pizza.
Yeah, use this for a comparison. I'll give you a couple other ideas. You could ask how many ounces was the pizza you consumed last night, or how many calories. But what's the problem with doing that?
I
have no idea how my
No one
is.
knows. I mean, unless you're a nutritionist,
Right.
you probably don't know.
Yeah. And I
So
know
it's really tricky. Either way, 24 pieces here is not at all the same as 24 here.
Right.
So sometimes with honest data, the wording could be a bit misleading. That's the point here.
That's just like going to Chuck E. Cheese and asking how many slices of pizza you want. So that's
Right, because that's smaller pizza and yeah, it's all relative. Okay, let's try this issue. So let's say I wanted to find out about your TV viewing habits. I said, tell me how much TV you've watched, we'll even say in the past week. And Devin says, I've watched about 6 shows, and Jenny says, well, I've watched about 7 hours. Who's watched more television? We don't know, because we don't know how long those 6 shows were. So you probably want to give people something to base it off of. Like, tell me how many different programs you watched or how many hours or minutes of TV you viewed. It's probably a better way of doing it. And one other issue. Let's say I asked how much television you watched in the past week, and you tell me a lot. What does that mean? I have no idea. Because for you, a lot may mean that you watched 5 hours, or it may mean you watched 20 hours, or anything. So if you can get people to be specific, that's better. When people put answers like rarely, often, frequently, it's honestly, it's a bit confusing. Yeah.
So because surveys have so many like parameters or issues that have to do with it, what would you say a good survey question is? What is an example of one?
They almost all have some challenges. So it's hard to think of like one good example. I'll tell you one they used to use that seemed clear was, what is your sex? What is your gender? And it used to be, they give you 2 boxes, male, female. What we know, and this has always been the case, is that a lot of people don't identify neatly as one or the other. Right. So it's tricky. Age is maybe a little better. How old are you in years? It's probably a little more clear cut. There's not really very much room for error. So I would say that might be a good, clear survey question to ask. But beyond that, there's challenges with almost all of them. Yeah. So you folks get surveys. You get them on your receipts. You get them in the mail. You get them on the phone, emailed. I don't know. Do you return all your surveys?
No.
No. Why not? Why don't people return surveys? Why don't they fill them out? What's that?
not interested.
Okay, you don't care about the subject? Absolutely. So if I asked you, how do you feel about the current state of government in Nicaragua? I mean, I don't know anything about it. I don't care. Or I could ask, how do you feel about the football playoffs? You may say, I don't care about football. It's not what I'm into. What are some other reasons we don't fill out surveys? Don't have the time. Yeah, I'm going to put these 2 together. Sometimes we're just lazy, but other times we're too busy. We don't have the time. Any other reasons?
I don't like the mail stuff.
Okay, because
I don't know how stamps cost money.
maybe some of that. I'll throw out a couple other things. Sometimes even well-intentioned people, sometimes they lose them, misplace them, they get damaged. But I want to bring up another really important issue. So let's say that we wanted to find out something about people's religious beliefs or about their sexual behavior. What's a big reason why they might not want to return their survey? Okay, it's too private. Yeah, they don't want to share that. Are others going to judge me negatively? Or I don't want to talk about my religious beliefs with strangers. I don't want to talk about my sex life with others. And so here's the big issue. If we're only hearing from people who are comfortable with discussing their sex lives and we're not hearing from other people, do you think they might have different behaviors?
Yes.
Probably, but we'll never know because they don't want to tell us. So that's a big issue. So what do? We want to get more people responding to our surveys. Any advice? Any ideas? How do you get more people to fill out surveys?
Yeah, I only fill out surveys if I get something.
Yep. What's in it for me? Now, before I get back to that, I'll throw one other thing out. I would say make the survey shorter. I don't know about you, I am a lot more likely to fill out a 1-page survey than a 10-page survey.
Yeah.
Make it shorter, please. But incentives, there's kind of 2 ways of doing this, and you've probably seen both of these in action. One is to offer an incentive to every single individual who fills out the survey. So like if you look at your receipts from places like Culver's, Panda Express, Burger King, a lot of times they'll say, if you fill this out, you get a free beverage next time, or free small fries, or a free scoop of ice cream, or an extra entree with purchase. So that incentive may get more people filling it out. The other way they do it is to offer bigger stuff, but to fewer people. So at places like Banfield and Best Buy, they'll say, hey, if you go online, fill out our survey, you'll be entered into a drawing to have a chance of winning, like $2,000 or $3,000 or something. You're probably not going to win. Sorry, hate to burst your bubble. They do actually give away the prizes, but there are so many people that respond. Your odds are very slim. But still, just offering that potential does get more people responding. That said, even though they respond, will they be honest? You don't know. We don't know. Memory. Why is this an issue? Okay. So let's say, for example, I asked you to tell me how many hours of television you have watched so far in the year 2022. You gonna be accurate? Probably not. What if I asked you how much pizza you've consumed in the past 5 years? Not going to be very accurate. Unless you know the answer is like 0, then it's easy. If you're like, I've only ate pizza 1 time in the past 5 years, I remember it well. Okay, you're weird if that's you. But for most of us, the time frame is way too long. So if you can shorten it a bit, instead of asking about the past 5 years with pizza consumption, maybe the past 2 weeks. Instead of asking about TV viewing since January 1st of this year, maybe the past 24 hours, you're more likely to get accurate data. But there is a problem with shortening the time frame. See if you can figure this out. So let's say I wanted to find out how often you go swimming. So I ask you, how many times in the past 10 years have you gone swimming? Probably going to be difficult, again, unless you know the answer is 0. If I said maybe the past year, I might get more accurate data. But let's say I really shorten the time frame. I say the past 2 months, how many times have you gone swimming? I'm pretty convinced I would get accurate data, but do you see a problem there?
Yeah, it's winter.
It's winter. People don't do a whole lot of swimming in the winter time, unless you've gone to a hotel or you've flown down to Florida or something like that.
I float around in my hot tub. Is that?
That's a good wording one. Does that count as being in the swimming
I
pool?
did that 2 days ago.
Does that count as swimming? I would say no, but you might say it does. So
My 5-year-old swims.
probably does. Okay, so we can shorten the time frame. Generally, that's a good idea, but the past week or day or month may or may not be typical. That's the problem, right? So if I asked you folks, how many times have you gone swimming in the past month? My guess is, again, unless you went to a hotel or Florida over the break, most of you would say 0. And so then I would say, okay, apparently none of you folks are swimmers, when that's not necessarily true. So you got to watch out a little bit when you narrow the time frame. Sometimes people can't remember the exact numbers or dates. So if I say, what is the last date on which you went skiing? Now, for some of you, it might be easy. Maybe it was just like last weekend. You could do that pretty quickly and easily. Or it was, on your 17th birthday and you remember it well. But for other people, it might be difficult to pin down that exact date. And again, even with wording, would you include water skiing or just snow skiing? What about snowboarding? Okay, you can see all these problems here. So what do we do about this? Well, one, I mentioned, we can shorten the time frame. Generally speaking, that's a good idea. I like the idea. We just don't know if the past week, month, whatever has been typical. That's a challenge. Okay.
I saw it's monthly when you they ask questions and you don't get the past 3 months.
Right. And again, are the past 3 months typical? Maybe yes, maybe no. Don't know. Okay, two other ideas. Actually, I'll put them both up. So that last one, kind of lame, but I said it earlier. We cross our fingers, hope it all balances out. Sometimes we do that. And one other idea is we can ask people to keep track of future events. So I could give you a journal and ask you, to write down every time you have pizza for the next 3 months. And while that's pretty accurate, and yes, you might forget to write down some stuff, it's probably more accurate than remembering the past 3 months. But there's a challenge here, which is that once you start keeping track of your behaviors, sometimes it changes the behavior. So if you're keeping track of your eating habits, you might say, oh, I'm in the mood for pizza, but I don't want to have to write that down because I'm really trying to eat healthier this year. So I'm not going to eat the pizza. Dang. Or if we ask people to keep track of every time they lose their temper for the next 3 months. Yeah, people might be embarrassed sometimes to write it down. And second, what does it mean to lose your temper? But there might be times where the person's really furious. Normally they yell and scream, but they're keeping track of it. And so they hold it in, which may be a good thing. But keeping track of behavior sometimes changes them, which is actually why it's a good strategy if you are trying to eat healthier, to lose weight, to exercise more. Keep track of your behaviors, making yourself responsible, and you're more likely to have better behaviors. Okay, one last big issue. Proper or representative sampling. Okay, I'll give you the general idea and then we'll get to some specifics. The general idea is this. We get back survey results from some people. Maybe it's hundreds, thousands, whatever. But there's no way to know if those people who respond are typical of the big group we're interested in. I'll give some examples here. Magazine samples. So let's say we have decided we want to study teenage sexuality. I want to find out about the sexual behaviors of teenagers. And yes, we know people may lie. And yes, we know that, the wording could play a big role. Like if we said, how many sexual partners have you had? What counts as a sexual partner? That gets tricky. Memory may be an issue too, for some. But I want to focus on this representative sampling. So let's say that we've written this really good survey about sexual behaviors, and the makers of 16 magazine agree to run that survey. And we get back the results from thousands of readers, and that's great. We've got a lot of data to play around with. Okay, what's the problem there? If we've gotten back results from the readers of 16 magazine, and we want to find out about typical sexual behaviors of teenagers. See a problem?
Really know if all of those are from teenagers.
Okay, so there may be an honesty, and you're right, we don't truly know who's filling it out. That's a great point. But let's pretend for a minute we get back results and we know that they are all people who are teenagers who read this magazine. It still is limited. What are we missing there? Who is likely to read that magazine and fill it out? Yeah. Girls. Yeah, we'd be finding out a lot about teenage female sexuality, but probably not a whole lot about male sexuality in adolescence. Okay, I could be wrong. My guess is there's not a whole lot of 16-year-old males who read that magazine. I could be wrong. Okay, likewise, if we're only surveying readers of Time magazine or Sports Illustrated or Reader's Digest, there's certain people who are more likely to read those publications, and you get good information about that magazine's readers, but maybe not about people in general. Does that make sense? Okay. Find out who's doing the asking. So find out, was this published in Time magazine, Reader's Digest, 16, Playboy? Because those are very different groups. Likewise, if the survey came from Planned Parenthood, you may get very different results than if the survey came from the Catholic Church. So pay close attention to that one too. And then I want to give a couple other examples here. We'll come back to this if I have time. We'll see. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I do want to talk about this, because this is something you folks are probably a little bit more familiar with. How many of you have ever been to ratemyprofessors.com? Right? More than half the class. So if you go there, you do one of two things. You can go there and actually rate your professors. Any professor you've had, encountered, whatever, you can go there. You do have to like register first, and then you can give feedback about that instructor. But what most people do there is they read what other people have written about professors. Okay? And they break it down by school and professor. You can go there, put in Delta, and find out about hundreds of Delta instructors, including me. And actually, if you go there, I meant to check during the before class. I ran out of time though. Last I saw, it was about 200, close, maybe 180 students had rated me, which is more than most other professors at Delta. It's not necessarily good, just means a lot of people. We'll get to whether it's good or not in just a second. The reason I've got more people who have rated me is two things. Number one, I've taught here longer than most other Delta faculty. Second, I mention this in a lot of my classes. So if nothing else, it's on your radar, whereas it might not be in other teachers' classes. Okay, so anyway, you can go there and you can read what people think about me. And it's kind of a mixed bag there. So who is likely to go to that website and rate their professors? Well, number one, they must have heard of the website, step one. Step number two is they need to have taken the time to actually write something at that site. A lot of people have heard of it, but they don't go to it, or they've gone to it, and they're thinking, I don't want to take the time to rate my professors, I just want to read it. And then beyond that, so they're aware of the site, they've gone there, they've taken the time to do this, but who's more likely to put stuff there? I would argue it's probably people with strong opinions. You want to go there and say, yeah, they were okay. Maybe. But I think a lot of people go there because they either want to slam the professor and talk about how terrible, horrible, awful, avoid this prof at all costs, or how great that professor was. Loved this professor, loved the class, learned a lot, had fun, etc. And if you go there and read about me, you will see that most of the reviews are pretty positive, although the most recent one from May was really negative. So it's a little scary there. But here's the big issue. Are the respondents typical of the bigger group? Okay, so 200 or maybe 180. I mean, that sounds like a lot of people have rated me, and it is more than most profs. But is that a lot? Well, I've been teaching here about 25 years, and in a typical year, I teach somewhere around 200, maybe 250 students. So do the quick math here. They say never do math in public, so that's why I'm actually going to calculate it here. 250 times 25. That means I've had somewhere in the ballpark of about 6,250 students, more or less. More or less, 6,250. And I've had about 180 rate me. Now, does that seem like a lot? Not so much. It's not even 3% of my students who have rated me. Actually, I could do the math on that. Why not? 6,250 divided by 180. That means that about, that's not right. Let's try that again. That's not right. I did it backwards. 180 divided by 6,250. That's the way to go. Okay, so a little bit less than 3% of all of my students have rated me. 3%. So how confident do you want to be based on the results from 3% of my students? You should be saying, yeah, I don't want to be too confident. Okay. So I can tell you this, end of the semester evaluations, generally they're very positive for me. Generally they are. They're much better than the kind of more mixed ratings I get on Rate My Professor. But Rate My Professor does have a couple of advantages. Number one, at that website, you can go at any point in the semester. So maybe after the first quiz today, you're thinking, this teacher sucks. I can't stand that jerk. Okay. End of the semester, you may have a very different point of view, for better or worse there. Second, in class, when I do it at the end of the semester, I only hear from students who are still in class then, right? The student who dropped in week number 3 because I'm a terrible instructor, I don't get that evaluation information, but I can get it there. Okay, here's the point. Is this reflective of the bigger group? Not necessarily. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I would say always be a little bit cautious when you hear about the results of a survey, especially if it's from a small percent of the people who could respond to the survey. Make sense? Okay, let me backtrack for just a moment, talk a little bit about the election from long ago before any of us were around. I'll try to make it a quick story here, but it's an interesting one. In 1948, the 2 main presidential candidates were Thomas A. Dewey and Harry S. Truman. And back then, they did the same thing we do today. They did a lot of polls leading up to the election day. They wanted to find out who people were going to vote for. So there was a research firm that called thousands, tens of thousands of people from all across the United States, and they asked them a few questions. They said, A, are you a registered voter? Right. Do you plan on voting in the upcoming election? Yes, great. Who do you plan to vote for? And overwhelmingly, people said they were going to vote for Dewey. So there was a Chicago newspaper that heard about the results of this survey. They heard about the results very close to Election Day. And since the survey was so overwhelmingly pro-Dewey, they made a really bold decision that came back to bite them later. What they did was they decided that for the next morning's papers, the day after the election, before the votes had even been counted, the Chicago paper ran with a headline, Dewey defeats Truman, because the survey was so overwhelming. However, the survey was wrong, okay? So here's my question for you. Why was the survey so wrong? Now, I'll tell you what it wasn't, then we'll see if we can figure out what it was. There was no big scandal that broke right before the election day. It wasn't that people changed their mind and who they would vote for. And keep in mind, the headline ran the day after the election, so it's not like it affected who people voted for. But why do you think the survey was so wrong? We get Eliana first and then Devin. What do you think?
It was probably like from specific areas where Dewey's party was favored.
That's a great guess, but that's not the case. They called tens of thousands of people all across the United States. But I like where you're going with that, because you're right. If they only called people in the South or in the Midwest, or that could absolutely affect results. But they called people all across the U.S. So it's a good guess. It's wrong, but it's a good guess, though. I like that one. What do you think, Devin?
In that time period, most people did not have phones.
That's
so
correct.
The ones that they called were wealthier individuals who usually fall into a more conservative category.
Perfect. Yeah. These days, everyone's got a phone, probably on you right now. But in 48, not everyone had a phone. It was mainly just the wealthy people. And wealthy people tend to vote Republican. They tend to be more conservative. And so even though they were trying to figure out what Americans thought, they mainly just contacted wealthy, older, white Republican voters who did support Dewey. Dewey easily won with them, but amongst the middle class, lower incomes, Truman overwhelmingly won. So even though it was very well intentioned, they had a good game plan, they mainly only wound up talking to a certain segment of voters. So you got to be a bit cautious. Find out who has done the surveying and find out how they did it, because both of those things potentially could play a big role in determining the outcome of your findings. With me on that?
Yes.
Okay. So let me give you a little sneak preview of where we are headed here on Thursday. At the start of class, we're going to talk about correlational research. So if you haven't read Module 1.3 yet, please do so. We'll talk about correlations, positive, negative, zero, and what that means. But we're going to spend most of class next time talking about experiments. Kind of have a sense of what they are. I've touched on them a little bit, but we'll get into a lot more detail next time. Again, I should have grades posted for your quiz, maybe within the hour. If not, it'll be before my bedtime tonight. I don't know, probably before your bedtime too. But I will get to them. Otherwise, have yourselves a great day, and I will see you back here on Thursday. See you, Cole.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
Absolutely.
I didn't want to do it before because we had the test and I was trying to cram them.
No worries. Yeah, just be sure to put your name on it also. There you go.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome. It's Desiree, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You too. And I'm shutting this down. Bye, everyone.